Case 1. Morgan Skye, Thornton. August 1, 2025, Limestone County, Alabama. There are nights that begin like any other. A neighborhood quiet under a summer sky. Porch lights on. Children inside. The kind of stillness that suggests safety, that suggests order, that suggests the world is working the way it should. On the night of July 31st, 2025, a neighborhood on Estate Drive in Athens, Alabama looked exactly like that. Peaceful. Ordinary. Unremarkable. What happened inside one home on that street before the clock struck midnight was none of those things. At approximately 12:38 in the morning on August 1st, 2025, Limestone County Sheriff's deputies responded to what was logged as a medical call. A child. An infant. Unresponsive. The deputies who arrived at that address on Estate Drive were not prepared for what they found when they stepped through the door. An 8-month-old baby boy named Jonah showed no signs of life. He was not breathing. He did not respond to touch. His small body bore the marks of what investigators would later describe as severe physical harm. Injuries that, according to court testimony, covered the room where he had slept. There was evidence of significant trauma across the space. Blood on the walls. Blood on the floor. A scene that would haunt every first responder who entered it for the rest of their lives. Deputies and emergency medical personnel from Athens Fire and Athens Limestone EMS did not give up. Working with everything they had, they were able to restore a pulse. Baby Jonah was rushed from the scene, first directed toward UAB Trauma Services in Birmingham, then rerouted mid-transport to the closest available hospital, Cullman Regional. When his condition became critical en route, he arrived alive, but the injuries he had sustained were catastrophic in their scope. No 8-month-old body was built to endure what Jonah Thornton had endured that night. He did not survive. The investigation that followed moved quickly because the answer to who had harmed this child was not hidden. Standing outside the home when investigators arrived was 35-year-old Morgan Skye Thornton, Jonah's mother. She was covered in blood. She appeared, according to the sworn testimony of Limestone County Sheriff's Office investigator Martin Evans, to be heavily intoxicated. When paramedics worked desperately to save her son, she reportedly shouted at them. She reportedly made statements that investigators would later describe in court as an admission. Inside the house, according to testimony presented at a preliminary hearing on August 14, 2025, investigator Evans described finding the room where Jonah had slept in a state that reflected extreme violence. Bloodstains covered multiple surfaces. The scene, he said, was one of the most disturbing he had encountered in his career. An autopsy conducted by the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences determined that Jonah Thornton's cause of death was the result of severe physical trauma, injuries consistent with a violent assault on an infant. There was another detail that emerged during testimony, one that stopped the courtroom. Investigator Evans testified that another investigator informed him that Jonah's father, Morgan Thornton's husband, reported being woken up by his wife that night. She had come to him with a message. She told him, according to that account, that she had killed a demon. The demon was her own baby's son. Morgan Skye Thornton was initially charged with aggravated child abuse when deputies first arrived at the scene. When Jonah died, that charge was elevated. She was charged with capital murder. She was denied bond at a hearing where she stood before a judge appearing confused and disoriented, telling the court she did not understand what was happening. She said she had put her son to bed. She said she had swaddled him. She said something happened that she could not remember. She said she had tried to give him CPR. Court records in Limestone County reveal that Morgan Thornton was not without a prior history of documented violent behavior. Just 2 weeks before Jonah's death, on July 15, 2025, she had pleaded guilty to second-degree assault stemming from an incident in which she kicked a Limestone County Sheriff's Sergeant. That charge had itself arisen after a June 11th domestic violence incident involving her husband. The system had intersected with Morgan Thornton's life before. It had not been enough to protect the smallest, most defenseless member of her household. Jonah Thornton had a twin brother named Levi. He had 2 other siblings. On the night that changed everything, those children lost their brother. Their mother was taken into custody. Their father was left to carry a grief that no one should ever have to carry alone. As of the filing of this documentary, Morgan Skye Thornton remains in custody at the Limestone County Jail, awaiting further proceedings under Alabama's Aaniyah's law hearing process. The capital murder charge against her carries the possibility of the death penalty under Alabama law. The case is being actively prosecuted by the Limestone County District Attorney's Office. Jonah Thornton was 8 months old. He had a twin. He had siblings who will grow up knowing what happened in that house on Estate Drive. He deserved every year he never got to live. The justice system in Limestone County is now tasked with making sure that what happened to him is answered for, fully, formally, and permanently on the record. Child safety advocacy organizations across Alabama continue to urge anyone who witnesses signs of harm to children, including unusual behavior by caregivers, unexplained injuries, or alarming statements, to contact the Department of Human Resources Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4-CHILD, available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Children cannot advocate for themselves. That responsibility falls on every community. If this case moved you, if you believe that Jonah's story deserves to be heard, please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Every subscriber tells the platform that content like this, content that takes victims seriously, that names what happened, and that follows these cases all the way through the justice system, deserves to be seen. We will be here every step of the way. Case 2, Serena Starkey. March 2, 2024 Jefferson County/Shelby County, Alabama. There is a kind of suffering that is invisible to the outside world. It happens behind closed doors, in spaces where no one is watching, in situations where the most vulnerable people, the ones who cannot leave, the ones who cannot call for help, the ones who depend entirely on the person who is supposed to protect them, are left with no recourse and no rescue. The story of Aston Starkey is one of those stories, and it is one of the most heartbreaking cases this channel has ever documented. Aston Starkey was 13 years old. He had Down syndrome. He was, by every account from those who knew him, a young man who deserved the kind of care, patience, and unconditional love that every child with special needs deserves. He was entirely dependent on the adults in his life to provide for his basic needs: food, shelter, medical attention, human warmth. He could not navigate the world alone. He needed someone who would show up for him every single day, without fail. That person was supposed to be his mother. On March 2, 2024, Birmingham Fire and Rescue Service personnel responded to a call at the Extended Stay America Hotel on Cahaba Park Circle in Birmingham, Alabama. The call was logged as a person-down situation. When emergency responders arrived, they found Aston Starkey unresponsive. They transported him immediately to Grandview Medical Center in Birmingham. He was pronounced dead at the hospital. He was 13 years old. He weighed far less than any 13-year-old boy should weigh. At first, the manner of Aston's death was not classified. The Birmingham Police Department and Jefferson County authorities launched what was initially described as an unclassified death investigation. Simultaneously, the Shelby County Department of Human Resources became involved and began conducting its own parallel inquiry into the circumstances surrounding the teenager's death. There was something about the scene, something about Aston's condition, something that told investigators that the story they were looking at was not finished. 3 months passed. On June 6, 2024, the results of Aston Starkey's autopsy came back. The findings were unambiguous. Aston Starkey had died from malnutrition and dehydration, complicated by neglect. His manner of death was ruled a homicide by the medical examiner's office. The Shelby County DHR immediately notified the Birmingham Police Department's homicide unit. What followed was swift. On June 7, 2024, just 1 day after the autopsy results were confirmed, the Shelby County District Attorney's Office issued a murder warrant for Serena Starkey, 43 years old, Aston's mother. Birmingham police announced the warrant publicly, asking for the community's help in locating her. Serena Starkey was not in custody. She had not been found. She was gone. The Birmingham Police Department's public statement made clear the scope of what investigators believed had happened. Aston Starkey, a teenager with Down syndrome who was entirely dependent on his mother for his survival, had been allowed to deteriorate to the point of death through sustained and catastrophic neglect. He had not received adequate food. He had not received adequate hydration. He had not received the medical attention that his condition required. The medical examiner determined that this neglect, this failure to provide for a child who had no means of providing for himself, had taken his life. Law enforcement searched for Serena Starkey for weeks. The investigation extended across state lines. Nearly 3 weeks after the murder warrant was issued, authorities in Texas located Serena Starkey. She was dead. The circumstances of her death were not immediately released. The case, in the eyes of the legal system, could not proceed to trial. There would be no courtroom verdict. There would be no sentencing. The woman charged with ending her son's life through prolonged neglect would not stand before a jury. But what happened to Aston Starkey is documented. It is on record. His autopsy findings are part of the permanent record of Jefferson County and Shelby County, Alabama. His cause of death, malnutrition, dehydration, neglect, ruled a homicide, is established and cannot be erased. The system that was supposed to protect him failed. His mother, the person charged with his care, failed him in the most fundamental way a parent can fail a child. Aston Starkey deserved better. He deserved a full life. He deserved someone who saw his potential instead of his limitations, someone who understood that caring for a child with Down syndrome is not a burden, but a privilege. The true crime community, the disability advocacy community, and every parent who has ever watched a child with special needs navigate this world with courage and joy, all of them know that what happened to Aston Starkey was not inevitable. It was a choice made, day after day, by the person who was supposed to love him most. The National Down Syndrome Society offers resources for families, caregivers, and advocates who support individuals with Down syndrome. Their website is ndss.org. If you know a child with special needs who may be in an unsafe situation, please contact the National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4-CHILD. Every call matters. If Aston's story stayed with you, and it should, please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. This channel exists because these stories deserve to be told, these victims deserve to be remembered, and these communities deserve to know what happened in their midst. We are not going anywhere. Stay with us. Case 3, Aaniyah Nowden. July 7, 2023, Jefferson County, Alabama. Birmingham, Alabama. A Friday night in the summer. A neighborhood called Norwood on the north side of the city, where working families have built their lives for generations. On July 7, 2023, a domestic situation unfolded on the 3200 block of 17th Avenue North. A confrontation that brought together two women connected to the same man, both of them expecting children, both of them young, both of them standing on opposite sides of a conflict that should never have reached the point it reached. By the time that night was over, one of those women was gone. Her unborn child was gone. And what had begun as an argument became a capital murder case that would wind its way through the Jefferson County court system for nearly 3 full years before reaching its conclusion. Justina Zenola Wallace was 36 years old. She was a mother of 5 children. She was several months pregnant with a 6th. On the evening of July 7th, she went to a home on 17th Avenue North, a home connected to the father of her toddler daughter. The situation there was already layered with tension. Aaniyah Nowden, 21 years old at the time and 8 months pregnant herself, was also at that location. The two women shared a complicated connection. The man who had fathered Justina's toddler had also fathered Aaniyah's unborn child. What prosecutors would later describe in Jefferson County Circuit Court was a confrontation that escalated from an argument into a one-sided act of lethal violence. According to court testimony in the account presented by Deputy District Attorney Jason Wilson, Justina Wallace was not a threat at the moment everything went wrong. She was holding her toddler daughter in her arms. 2 of her other children were nearby. She had no weapon. She was not in an aggressive posture. She was, according to the prosecution's account, simply present, vulnerable, pregnant, and standing in the wrong place at a moment when someone else had already made a decision. Aaniyah Nowden produced a firearm and fired it. Justina Wallace was struck. Her 2 sons, who were present and who witnessed what happened to their mother, would carry that image for the rest of their lives. Emergency services were summoned. Justina Wallace was transported to a hospital. She died the following day, July 8, 2023, from the injuries she sustained. Her unborn child, a baby girl her family called Skye, also did not survive. 2 lives ended that night on 17th Avenue North. Nowden was arrested by the Birmingham Police Department and charged with capital murder. The charges were filed under multiple counts. Capital murder in the presence of a child under the age of 14, with Justina Wallace's own toddler counted among the witnesses to the act. The case was presented to the Jefferson County District Attorney's Office under District Attorney Danny Carr, who announced the charges publicly and made clear the severity of what had occurred. The road to justice was not a straight one. The case went to trial in May of 2026, nearly 3 years after the shooting. The first trial collapsed. A mistrial was declared after the dismissal of too many potential jurors left the court unable to proceed with a sufficient panel. A retrial was immediately convened. This time, the jury went the distance. On May 29, 2026, a Jefferson County jury found Aaniyah and Nowden guilty of capital murder. The recommendation of the jury, which Jefferson County law required to be considered in sentencing, was life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court accepted that recommendation. Aaniyah Nowden, 24 years old at the time of sentencing, was formally sentenced to spend the remainder of her natural life behind bars in the Alabama Department of Corrections. District Attorney Danny Carr addressed the verdict publicly. His words were measured, careful, and pointed. He noted that there were no winners in a case like this one. He said that when emotions run high, logic runs low. He called on the community to understand that violence is not a solution, that picking up a weapon in a moment of jealousy or anger has real consequences, permanent consequences, consequences that change multiple lives forever and cannot be undone. Deputy District Attorney Jason Wilson, who delivered the prosecution's closing arguments in the retrial, put it plainly to the jury. Justina Wallace had nothing in her hands but her baby. She was not attacking anyone. She was not a threat. She was a mother holding her child, and she was taken from those children, along with the baby she was carrying, by an act that no justification can excuse. Nowden's defense had argued self-defense, that Justina Wallace was the aggressor, that she was belligerent, that Nowden acted out of fear. The jury did not find that argument persuasive. The physical evidence, the eyewitness accounts, and the prosecution's presentation of events left the jury with a verdict that reflected what the facts supported. Justina Zenola Wallace's 5 surviving children are growing up without their mother. They are growing up without the sister she was carrying when she died. Those children will carry July 7, 2023, with them for the rest of their lives. The Jefferson County justice system answered for what happened to Justina and to baby Skye with the full weight of the law: capital murder, life without parole, no possibility of early release. That accountability matters. It does not fill the absence Justina left, but it matters. If this case moved you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. These stories are not easy to tell, and they are not easy to hear, but they are necessary. Justina Wallace and her daughter Skye deserve to be remembered by more than those who knew them personally. They deserve a community that knows their names. Case 4, Jasmine Hutcherson. November 6, 2021, Jefferson County, Alabama. There are losses so complete, so early, and so unnecessary that they demand a response beyond grief. They demand accountability. They demand that the facts be placed on the public record and that the people responsible for them face the full consequence of what they chose to do. The case of Tremont Jenkins is one of those losses. 3 months old. 3 months. That was the entirety of his time on this earth, and the person who ended it was the person who had brought him into the world. On the morning of Saturday, November 6, 2021, officers from the Birmingham Police Department's East Precinct responded to a call at a residence located at 4507 8th Terrace North in Birmingham, Alabama. The address placed the incident in the Morton Simpson Homes area of the city. What officers found when they arrived was a 3-month-old infant boy, Tremont Jenkins, lying unresponsive in a baby bed. He was not breathing. Birmingham Fire and Rescue responded to the scene. Emergency personnel transported Tremont Jenkins immediately to Children's of Alabama, the state's premier pediatric hospital, located on the University of Alabama at Birmingham Medical Campus. Everything that could be done for the infant was done. It was not enough. Tremont Jenkins was pronounced dead at Children's of Alabama. The Birmingham Police Department's homicide unit took command of the investigation that followed. Sergeant Rod Malden served as the public face of the department's early communications on the case. On Sunday, November 7, 2021, one day after Tremont's body was discovered, the Jefferson County Coroner's Office formally determined the cause of death to be a homicide. The manner in which Tremont Jenkins had lost his life was not an accident. The physical evidence told investigators a story that led directly to one person. That person was Jasmine Hutcherson. She was 24 years old. She was Traymon's mother. Detectives from the Birmingham Police Department's Homicide Unit compiled their findings and presented the case to the Jefferson County District Attorney's Office for review. What they presented was sufficient. A capital murder warrant was issued against Jasmine Hutcherson. She was taken into custody and transported to the Jefferson County Jail, where she was held without bond. The nature of the charge, capital murder, reflected the gravity of what the evidence showed had been done to a 3-month-old child. According to BAMWiki's documentation of the 2021 Birmingham homicide record, Traymon Jenkins' death appeared to have been caused by severe physical harm directed at the infant's head. The force involved in causing those injuries, the force applied to a 3-month-old child who weighed only a handful of pounds and whose entire body could fit in an adult's 2 hands, reflects a degree of harm that investigators described as consistent with what would be expected in a homicide investigation of this nature. Traymon Jenkins was 3 months old. He was entirely defenseless. He had no ability to protect himself, no ability to flee, no ability to call for help. He was dependent on the person closest to him for everything: warmth, nourishment, safety, love. That person was the person who took his life. The Jefferson County District Attorney's Office took the case seriously from the moment it was presented. The capital murder charge placed Jasmine Hutcherson in the highest tier of criminal accountability under Alabama law, carrying potential penalties that include life in prison without the possibility of parole or, under certain circumstances, the death penalty. The case moved into the Jefferson County court system, which has the jurisdiction and the responsibility to carry it to its conclusion. As of the documentation available for this episode, Jasmine Hutcherson's case has been in the Jefferson County system since November 2021. The investigation was thorough, the charge was appropriate, and the evidence was placed before the appropriate legal authorities. The Birmingham Police Department and Jefferson County institutions have a documented record of pursuing cases involving harm to children with the seriousness they deserve. Traymon Jenkins deserved to grow up. He deserved every milestone that was stolen from him before he was old enough to smile, to walk, to speak his first word. He was 3 months old, and he mattered. His life mattered. His death matters. The outcome of this case, whenever it comes, will be tracked and documented because Traymon Jenkins is not a statistic. He is a child whose name should be spoken. Organizations like the Alabama chapter of the National Children's Alliance provide resources and advocacy for child victims of abuse across the state. If you are a parent struggling with the weight of caregiving, please reach out. Help is available. The Alabama DHR Family Services line can connect struggling families with support before a crisis reaches a point of no return. Please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Traymon's story is on this channel because every child who loses their life to violence inside the home deserves more than a court record. They deserve to be remembered by the wider world. Stay with us. Case 5, Adrienne Reid. Christmas Day, 2025, charged March 9, 2026, Coffee County, Alabama. Some cases break through the noise of the news cycle and lodge themselves into the collective memory of an entire region. Some cases become the ones that people remember where they were when they first heard about them. The case of Genesis Nova Reid is one of those cases. It became a story that captured the attention of an entire state. The disappearance of a 2-year-old girl, the volunteer searches, the pink ribbons, the digital billboards, and then, months later, the devastating revelation of what had actually happened to her and who was responsible. Genesis Nova Reid was 2 years old. March 9, 2026, was supposed to be her 3rd birthday. On February 16, 2026, Adrienne Reid, Genesis's 33-year-old mother, contacted law enforcement in Enterprise, Alabama, in Coffee County, and reported that her daughter was missing. She told authorities that she had woken up in the early morning hours and found Genesis gone from her bed. She told them the front door of their apartment on Apache Drive was ajar. She told them her daughter had simply vanished in the night. The report triggered an immediate and massive community response. Enterprise mobilized. Volunteers poured in from across the region. People wore pink in Genesis's honor. Digital billboards throughout the city displayed her image. The search for a missing toddler became a community rallying point. But investigators, even in those early days, noticed something. Neighbors who were interviewed told law enforcement that they had not seen Genesis Reid for weeks, not since well before February 16th. The timeline Adrienne Reid was presenting to police did not align with what the community around her had observed. Something was wrong. Authorities looked deeper. They began to piece together a different narrative. They obtained surveillance footage from a neighboring residence at the apartment complex on Apache Drive. What that footage allegedly showed changed everything. On the night of December 25th, 2025, Christmas night, Adrienne Reid was captured on camera walking toward the apartment complex's dumpster at approximately 11:30 in the evening. She was pulling a rolling duffel bag. She placed the bag inside the dumpster. 2 days later, on December 27th, she returned to the same dumpster. This time, she was carrying toys and other items investigators believe belonged to Genesis. Enterprise Police Chief Michael Moore reviewed that footage. He reviewed the timeline. He reviewed what neighbors had said. And he reached a conclusion that the evidence, as he described it, supported beyond any reasonable question. Genesis Nova Reid had not gone missing on February 16th. Genesis Nova Reid had lost her life on Christmas night, more than 7 weeks before her mother picked up a phone and reported her missing. 7 weeks during which Adrienne Reid had been living her daily life, while her 2-year-old daughter was in a landfill. Adrienne Reid was initially arrested for filing a false report to law enforcement, a Class C felony under Alabama law. Then the investigation continued. On March 9, 2026, the day that would have been Genesis's 3rd birthday, Enterprise Police Chief Moore stood before the cameras and the community and announced that Adrienne Reid was being formally charged with capital murder and abuse of a corpse. The district attorney for Coffee County, James Tarbox, stated publicly that the state would be seeking the death penalty. Chief Moore described the evidence. He described the video. He described what authorities believed had happened to Genesis after she was placed in that duffel bag. He described the landfill search that was being coordinated, a painstaking, methodical effort across more than 100 acres of Coffee County landfill to find Genesis's remains, which had still not been located as of the filing of charges. Coffee County Sheriff Scott Bird confirmed that the landfill search had been in planning since early in the investigation. Specialists were brought in. The process, he said, could take 10 weeks or longer. The entire community of Enterprise watched and waited, not for the outcome of a trial, but for the basic dignity of recovering a little girl's body and bringing her home to those who loved her. Adrienne Reid's defense attorney, David Harrison, publicly stated that his client's case was built on theories rather than hard evidence, and invoked her presumption of innocence. He maintained that the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt requires more than an educated guess. Those are the appropriate statements of a defense attorney. The legal process will determine the outcome. What the legal process cannot undo is the absence of Genesis Nova Reid. It cannot restore what was taken from her on Christmas night. It cannot give back the birthday she never reached. It cannot unring the bell of what Enterprise, Alabama, discovered about what happened to one of their smallest community members. District Attorney Tarbox's words at the press conference have stayed with many who followed this case. He said that Adrienne Reid killed her daughter, literally threw her in the trash, and then engaged in a months-long campaign of deception. The state, he made clear, intends to hold her to the highest possible account. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children operates a 24-hour hotline at 1-800-THE-LOST, 1-800-843-5678, for anyone with information on missing children. Genesis Reid's case is a reminder that behind every missing persons report, there may be a child who needs to be found, and a truth that needs to be uncovered. Please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Genesis deserved her 3rd birthday. She deserved to blow out candles and have cake and be surrounded by people who love her. That didn't happen. What we can do, what this community of viewers can do, is make sure her name is never forgotten. Stay with us. Case 6, Bonita Cunningham. May 29, 2018. Convicted January 2023, Monroe County, Alabama. Not every case that demands attention comes with the immediacy of a breaking news alert. Some of the most significant cases, the ones with the deepest implications for how communities protect their most vulnerable members, move slowly through the system, accumulating evidence, surviving legal challenges, and eventually arriving at an outcome that reflects the weight of what actually happened. The case of Cataleya Jordan Kyles is one of those cases. It took years. It required persistence from law enforcement, from prosecutors, and from a family that refused to let the system forget what happened to an 11-month-old baby girl. Cataleya Jordan Kyles was 11 months old. She never made it to her first birthday. The events that culminated in Cataleya's death unfolded in Monroe County, Alabama, a rural county in the southwestern part of the state, beginning with what should have been a warning the system was obligated to heed. In October of 2017, 11-month-old Cataleya was brought to Monroe County Hospital for injuries that her mother, Bonita Cunningham, reportedly attributed to an accident involving the baby. Medical staff at the facility determined that Cataleya's injuries were consistent with shaken baby syndrome, a pattern of bruising, swelling, and internal bleeding to the brain caused by violent shaking of an infant. She was transferred to USA Children's and Women's Hospital in Mobile, where her diagnosis was confirmed. That should have been the end of any possibility of Cataleya returning to that home. Instead, according to a subsequent wrongful death lawsuit filed on behalf of Cataleya's maternal grandmother, the Alabama Department of Human Resources returned the child to the home. The system, the lawsuit alleged, had been given clear evidence of severe harm and had nonetheless placed Cataleya back in the care of the person responsible for causing it. On the morning of May 29, 2018, Excel Police Department officers responded to a call at Monroe County Hospital. A baby had been brought in. She was deceased. Cataleya Kyles, 11 months old. Visible injuries on her small body prompted Excel Police Chief Jeff Dunn to request that an affidavit for a murder warrant be signed. The preliminary cause of death, according to court documents obtained at the time, was listed as blunt force trauma. The manner of death was homicide. Bonita Cunningham, 29 years old at the time of Cataleya's death, was arrested and booked into the Monroe County Detention Facility. Her bond was set at $80,000. Her boyfriend, Dennis Hutcherson, was also indicted on a murder charge in connection with Cataleya's death. In March of 2019, a Monroe County Circuit judge ordered that Cunningham undergo a mental evaluation, a routine step in serious criminal cases that can affect the timeline and nature of proceedings. The case moved through the Monroe County legal system over the course of years. The wrongful death lawsuit filed against the Alabama Department of Human Resources, DHR Commissioner Nancy Buckner, and 2 Monroe County DHR employees named the institutional failures that had contributed to Cataleya's exposure to continued danger. Birmingham attorneys Tommy James and Jeremy Knowles, who filed the suit on behalf of the child's maternal grandmother, said plainly what many in the community believed. Cataleya should never have been placed back in that home. The system had been given the warning. The system had not acted on it. Bonita Cunningham was ultimately convicted of murder. She was sentenced to life in prison. The outcome of the case established that what happened to Cataleya Kyles, the injuries she sustained, the neglect of the warning signs, the escalation to a fatal assault, was a criminal act for which the perpetrator would be held permanently accountable. The broader questions raised by Cataleya's case, about institutional responsibility, about the obligations of DHR case workers when physical evidence of harm is presented, about the protocols that govern whether a child is returned to a home where danger has been documented, are questions that child welfare advocates in Alabama have continued to press. Every child protection system in every state wrestles with the tension between family reunification and child safety. When the balance tips in the wrong direction, children pay the price. Cataleya Jordan Kyles never saw her first birthday. She survived her first serious injury, and then the system that was supposed to protect her sent her back. That cannot be changed. What can be changed is how institutions respond when a baby presents with documented evidence of harm. Accountability begins with that response. If you are a mandated reporter, a healthcare professional, a teacher, a neighbor, or any adult who has reason to believe a child is in danger, Alabama law requires and empowers you to act. The DHR Child Abuse Hotline is 1-800-4-CHILD. That call can save a life. Cataleya's case is a permanent reminder of what happens when it is not made. Please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Cataleya Kyles was 11 months old, and she deserved the whole world. Her story deserves to be remembered. Stay with us. Case 7. Micia Sharika Gamble. April 13, 2020. Convicted November 2022. Sentenced January 2023. Jefferson County, Alabama. Birmingham, Alabama. Monday evening, April 13th, 2020. The city was already living under the shadow of a global pandemic. Streets quieter than usual, routines disrupted, households operating under an entirely different kind of pressure than the world had known before. Against that backdrop, officers from the Birmingham Police Department's West Precinct responded just after 8 o'clock in the evening to a residence at 716 Avenue H in the Pratt City neighborhood. What they found in the backyard of that home, beside a vehicle, was a 21-year-old man lying unresponsive. Birmingham Fire and Rescue responded alongside the Jefferson County Coroner's Office. The young man was pronounced deceased at the scene. His name was Tim Darius Theophilus Gamble. The person who had taken his life was his mother. The preliminary investigation conducted by Birmingham Police Department detectives established that a domestic dispute had preceded the events of that evening. What had begun as a conflict inside the household at 716 Avenue H had escalated to a point of no return. Tim Darius Gamble, 21 years old, died from a gunshot wound in the backyard of his family home. He died beside a vehicle, in the open air, in a neighborhood that would not forget what happened there that April night. Detectives identified two people responsible for Tim Darius's death. Micia Sharika Gamble, 45 years old, Tim Darius's mother, was arrested and charged with murder. Gregory Peck, 59 years old, Gamble's boyfriend and Tim Darius's stepfather figure, was also arrested and charged with murder. Both were taken into custody. The case was presented to the Jefferson County District Attorney's Office. The legal proceedings that followed took the two cases in different directions. Gregory Peck entered a guilty plea to the murder charge. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, to be served in the Alabama Department of Corrections. Micia Sharika Gamble did not plead guilty. She maintained that she had acted in self-defense, that the events of April 13th had placed her in a position where she felt she had no other option. She took that argument to trial. In November of 2022, a Jefferson County jury heard the case against Micia Sharika Gamble. They heard the evidence. They heard the testimony. They weighed the prosecution's account of what happened against the defense's claim of self-defense. The jury trial was conducted before Jefferson County Circuit Judge Shanna Craig Owens. The jury returned its verdict, guilty of murder. Sentencing was handed down on January 5, 2023. Micia Sharika Gamble, 48 years old at sentencing, was ordered to serve 90 years in the Alabama Department of Corrections. Gregory Peck, by the time of Gamble's sentencing, was already serving his 20 years. The man they had conspired to harm, the young man who had grown up in that house on Avenue H, who had reached the age of 21 and had his whole life ahead of him, was gone. Tim Darius Theophilus Gamble was 21 years old. He was young enough to still be figuring out who he was going to become. He had grown up in a house where, on a Monday evening in April, the people who should have been his safety net instead became the instrument of the worst thing that can happen to a person. He died in the backyard of his own home. The Jefferson County court system prosecuted this case with the full seriousness it warranted. The jury reached a verdict that reflected what the evidence showed. The 90-year sentence handed down to Micia Gamble represents the court's determination that what happened to Tim Darius Gamble was not an act of self-preservation, but an act of lethal aggression against a member of her own family. The sentence says that accountability for taking a life inside a family home is the same as accountability for taking a life anywhere else, that the biological relationship between a perpetrator and a victim does not mitigate the gravity of the act. Tim Darius Gamble's memory is part of what drives the Birmingham community's ongoing conversation about domestic violence, because domestic violence does not always look like what people expect. It is not always a partner. It is not always a stranger. Sometimes it happens between a parent and an adult child. Sometimes it happens in the backyard. And it always leaves something irreversible in its wake. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day at 1-800-799-SAFE, 1-800-799-7233. If you or someone you know is in a dangerous home situation, please reach out. Help exists. Tim Darius Gamble deserved to be protected. His story is a reminder of why that protection must be taken seriously. Please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Tim Darius was 21 years old with his whole life ahead of him. That life was stolen in the one place where he should have been safest. His name deserves to be remembered. Stay with us. Case 8, Jakayla Ashanti Williams. August 13, 2023. Charged August 24, 2023. Houston County, Alabama. There are moments in the course of a criminal investigation when a police chief, someone who has spent decades in law enforcement, who has seen the breadth of what human beings are capable of doing to one another, steps to a microphone and says something that tells you everything about the weight of what they are about to describe. When Dothan Police Chief Will Binney addressed the media on August 24, 2023, he said this: "I've never even heard of something so horrific as this. It shocks the mind. It shocks the soul." Chief Binney has been in law enforcement for more than 27 years. What he was describing was the case of Jakayla Ashanti Williams, 18 years old, a resident of Dothan, Alabama, in Houston County, and what she allegedly did in the early hours of August 13, 2023, after giving birth to a baby boy in the privacy of her own home, was something that a police chief with nearly 3 decades on the job had never, in all his years of service, encountered before. The case began not with a crime scene, but with a question. On August 24, 2023, staff members at Southeast Health Medical Center in Dothan contacted the Dothan Police Department with a report. A woman had come into the hospital. She was accompanied by family members. She was asking about a baby, a newborn baby that she claimed she had left in the care of a hospital employee on August 13, the day she said she had given birth. Hospital staff had no record of any such transaction. There was no baby. There was no employee who had received an infant. There was nothing in the hospital's documentation that corresponded to the story Jakayla Williams was telling. Investigators obtained surveillance footage. They reviewed the recordings from August 13, the date Williams claimed she had come to Southeast Health with her newborn son. She was not on the footage. She had not been at that hospital on that day. The story she had told her family, and then repeated to law enforcement, was not true. When investigators confronted Williams with the surveillance evidence, the account she had been giving began to change. She acknowledged that she had given birth at her residence on Tate Drive on August 13. She acknowledged that she had not taken the baby to the hospital. She acknowledged that she had placed the newborn in a blanket. And she acknowledged that she had taken that newborn, her living child, according to her own admission to police, and placed him inside a dumpster attached to a trash compactor at an apartment complex on the west side of Dothan. She said she did not want to be a mother at her age. She said having a baby cost too much money. Dothan Police Department investigators immediately went to the apartment complex. They located the dumpster, which was attached to a compaction mechanism that periodically crushes the material deposited inside it. They seized the entire dumpster unit and transported it to the City of Dothan landfill. There, investigators and officers worked through the contents systematically. Inside, wrapped in a mattress protector and placed inside a zipped duffel bag, they found the remains of a newborn baby boy. The remains were sent to the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences in Montgomery for confirmation of identity. Jakayla Ashanti Williams was arrested. She was charged with capital murder. She was held without bond at the Dothan City Jail. A Houston County grand jury subsequently returned an indictment on the capital murder charge. During a preliminary hearing in November of 2023, the state announced that it would be seeking the death penalty in Williams' case. The prosecution argued that she represented a danger to every child she might ever encounter, and that the nature of the act, the deliberate placement of a living newborn into a compaction unit, placed the case in the most serious category of criminal conduct. Jakayla Williams' attorney requested that she be considered for youthful offender status, which would have kept the proceedings largely private given her age. That request was denied by the presiding judge. A trial date was subsequently set for June 23, 2025, before Judge Butch Binford in Houston County Circuit Court. Jakayla Williams' family was entirely unaware that she had been pregnant. They did not know she had given birth. When she came home from the hospital visit, the visit where the story she had told began to unravel, her family had no idea what was coming. The investigation that followed revealed not just the loss of a baby boy who never had a name entered into any public record, but a sequence of deliberate choices made in the hours and days after his birth that reflected a determined effort to erase his existence. That baby boy deserved to live. He was placed in a dumpster alive. The last moments of his brief existence were spent in conditions that no human being, no living creature, should ever endure. The Houston County Justice System, the Dothan Police Department, and the prosecutors who have built this case are carrying that responsibility on behalf of a child who had no one to advocate for him at the moment he needed it most. If you are pregnant and in crisis, if you feel that you cannot care for a child and you do not know where to turn, Alabama has a safe haven law that allows a newborn to be surrendered at any hospital, fire station, or emergency medical services station within the first 7 days of life, with no questions asked and no legal consequences. That option is always available. Every hospital has a safe place to go. No child should face what this baby boy faced. Please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. This channel documents cases that demand accountability, cases where the smallest victims had no voice and no advocate. Every subscriber tells the platform that content like this matters. Stay with us. Case 9, Lakendra Yashekia Williams. January 28, 2018. Sentenced July 5, 2022, Tuscaloosa County, Alabama. The case of Demarius Kamari Henry is one that belongs to two separate timelines. The first is the timeline of what happened to him, an 8-week-old infant, barely 2 months into his existence, who arrived at Children's of Alabama in Birmingham with injuries so severe that the medical staff who received him immediately understood they were looking at something that had been done to him deliberately. The second is the timeline of justice, of an investigation carried out with meticulous care by a Tuscaloosa Police Department investigator who would not survive to see the verdict, whose work nonetheless endured and ultimately produced the outcome that the evidence demanded. On January 28, 2018, the father of 2-month-old Demarius Kamari Henry called 911. His voice carried the panic of a parent who has watched something go terribly wrong and cannot explain why. He told dispatchers that his son, who usually fussed and cried when a bath was being prepared, who responded to the sound and sensation of the water the way any healthy baby would, had that morning remained silent. He was sleepy. He was unresponsive. He was not right. Emergency services arrived at the residence in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Demarius was immediately transported to DCH Regional Medical Center. From there, the severity of what doctors found prompted a rapid transfer. Demarius was airlifted to Children's of Alabama, the same hospital in Birmingham where some of the state's most serious pediatric trauma cases are treated. What the medical team at Children's documented when they received him was a catalog of injuries that reflected extreme force applied to the body of an infant. Multiple skull fractures, severe bleeding in the brain, cardiac arrest. The 8-week-old boy's heart had stopped. Tuscaloosa Police Department investigator Darnell Cassette was assigned to the case. He went to Children's of Alabama on the day Demarius turned 8 weeks old, the same day the baby had arrived at the hospital. He spoke with the medical staff. He reviewed the findings. He began building the investigation that would ultimately establish what had happened to Demarius and who was responsible. Cassette interviewed Lakendra Yashekia Williams, the baby's 25-year-old mother. Her answers changed. She offered one explanation, then shifted to another. She suggested she might have dropped him. She suggested she might have elbowed him in her sleep. Each explanation, when measured against the medical findings, multiple skull fractures, catastrophic brain bleeding, cardiac arrest in an infant, failed to account for the severity and pattern of the injuries. Cassette pressed. And according to police records and the subsequent court record, Lakendra Williams eventually admitted that she had harmed her son because he was being whiny. 2 months old. She harmed a 2-month-old infant because he was being whiny. Demarius Kamari Henry survived the initial crisis. He was placed on life support at Children's of Alabama. He would remain there for more than a year. Investigator Darnell Cassette continued to visit him. He built the case file. He worked with the Tuscaloosa Violent Crimes Unit and the Tuscaloosa County District Attorney's Office to assemble the evidence that would eventually lead to prosecution. In February of 2019, 1 year after the initial injuries, Demarius Kamari Henry passed away. He was kept on life support for 374 days. His injuries had been too catastrophic for his young body to overcome. Lakendra Yashekia Williams was arrested on February 14, 2019, and charged with aggravated child abuse murder. She was booked into the Tuscaloosa County Jail. Investigator Darnell Cassette, who had carried Demarius's case with him for that entire year, who had visited the baby in the hospital, who had gathered the evidence, who had pressed the investigation forward, was killed in the line of duty in late 2019. He did not live to see the outcome of the case he had worked so hard to build. His work did not disappear with him. The Tuscaloosa Police Department carried the investigation forward in his name and in his honor. Lakendra Williams was indicted on murder charges. In March of 2022, she entered a guilty plea to the murder of Demarius Kamari Henry. On July 5, 2022, Judge Daniel Pruitt sentenced Lakendra Yashekia Williams to 40 years in prison in the Alabama Department of Corrections. The Tuscaloosa Police Department posted publicly about the outcome, acknowledging investigator Cassette's foundational role in building the case and expressing what many in the department believed, that Cassette would have been glad to know that justice had been delivered for Demarius. The Tuscaloosa community grieved Demarius and grieved Cassette, two losses bound together by one case. The 40-year sentence handed to Lakendra Williams does not fill either absence, but it carries the message that the justice system sends in every case where a child is harmed by the person charged with protecting them. This matters, this is seen, and this will be answered for. Demarius Kamari Henry was 8 weeks old when he was harmed. He lived for an entire additional year on machines, in a hospital, before his injuries took him. His father's panicked 911 call was the first step in a chain of events that eventually produced justice. Justice built in part by a detective who gave his life to his city and left a legacy of careful, serious, child-first police work that this community has not forgotten. The Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline is available at 1-800-4-CHILD, 1-800-422-4453. Anyone who suspects a child is being harmed can call, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Demarius could not call. Investigator Cassette answered for him. Please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Demarius Kamari Henry and investigator Dornell Cassette both deserve to be remembered. This channel will not let either of their names fade. Stay with us. Case 10. Ashley Elizabeth Catron. July 23, 2019. Sentenced 2022 Madison County, Alabama. There are cases that arrive in a community like a cold shock. Facts so stark, circumstances so preventable, outcomes so final that they force everyone who hears them to stop and reckon with what it means for a child to be truly without protection inside the home that should protect them most. The case of Hendrix Frink is that kind of case. He was 3 years old. He weighed 13 pounds. The average weight for a child his age is approximately 30 pounds. He had a 4-year-old brother who weighed 15 pounds, who, by a combination of whatever mercy existed in that house and the efforts of medical personnel, survived. Hendrix did not. On July 23, 2019, emergency medical services were called to a residence on Maple Ridge Boulevard in Huntsville, Alabama, in Madison County. The call was for an unresponsive child. When first responders arrived, they found Hendrix Frink, 3 years old, in a condition that immediately told everyone in that room that this child had not eaten in a very long time. Huntsville Fire and Rescue, Huntsville Emergency Medical Services, and police all responded to the scene. Hendrix was transported to Huntsville Hospital for Women and Children, where he was pronounced dead upon arrival or shortly thereafter. His 4-year-old brother, found in the same home, was also severely undernourished. He was rushed to the same hospital, where medical staff fought for his life. That brother survived. His weight at the time, 15 pounds for a 4-year-old, reflects the degree to which both children had been living in conditions of extreme deprivation. Investigators who entered the home on Maple Ridge Boulevard described a scene that reflected sustained, prolonged failure of every basic parental obligation. The home smelled strongly of urine. The boys' shared room contained cribs that were soiled with blood, feces, and urine. One crib showed signs of having been chewed, a detail that investigators noted in their documentation of the conditions the children had been living in. In the living room, there was a TV tray with breakfast foods on it, pancakes and other items, that may have been placed there too late to help the child who was already beyond saving. Ashley Elizabeth Catron was 36 years old. She was the boy's mother. She was not employed outside the home. She and her partner, Frederick Anthony Frink, 34 years old and the father of the children, lived with the two boys at the Maple Ridge Boulevard address. Frink was employed by the Tennessee Valley Authority. Catron told investigators that she did not believe in doctors. She said that when the children showed signs of deterioration, she had tried to nourish them with Pediasure, a nutritional drink. The medical testimony that followed, delivered during the preliminary hearing and subsequent proceedings, made clear that whatever had been provided to the children was catastrophically insufficient. 3-year-old Hendricks weighed 13 pounds. The medical standard for a child his age is closer to 30. He was not a small child by nature. He was a starving child. Both Ashley Catron and Frederick Frink were charged with aggravated child abuse of a child under the age of 6, a Class A felony under Alabama law, which carries the same classification as a murder charge. Prosecutor Tim Douthit described the charge to the court in those exact terms. A Class A felony, 10 to life, the same as murder. Both were denied bond at their initial hearings. Both were held in the Madison County Jail. The case moved through Madison County District Court and was referred to the grand jury for indictment. In February of 2020, the Madison County Grand Jury returned formal indictments on charges of aggravated child abuse against both parents. The couple had, by that point, filed for bankruptcy, having accrued tens of thousands of dollars in medical bills, according to court filings. The proceedings reached their conclusion when both Ashley Catron and Frederick Frink pleaded guilty. On the day of their sentencing, they appeared before a Madison County judge and acknowledged what they had done, or, more accurately, what they had failed to do. The judge sentenced both Ashley Catron and Frederick Anthony Frink to life in prison in the Alabama Department of Corrections. Life in prison for the starvation death of a 3-year-old boy in their own home. The 4-year-old brother of Hendricks Frink fought for his life in the hospital through the summer and autumn of 2019. He was later released after his weight reached a safe and stable level. According to reports at the time, he ultimately recovered to a healthy weight. He is alive. He survived. What he carries with him from those years on Maple Ridge Boulevard, what he knows, what he remembers, what shaped him in the earliest years of his life, is not something the courts can address. That is the work of healing, of support systems, and of the kind of ongoing care that the state of Alabama and its child welfare system owe him. Hendricks Frink deserved to eat. He deserved to be taken to a doctor when he was sick. He deserved to have a parent who, whatever their philosophical beliefs about medicine, looked at their 13-pound 3-year-old and understood that something was catastrophically wrong and acted to fix it. He deserved to live. His brother deserved to grow up beside him. The beliefs that Ashley Catron held about doctors, and the choice she and Frink made to substitute those beliefs for actual medical attention when 2 children in their care were visibly, severely deteriorating, are beliefs that the Madison County justice system has formally determined rose to the level of criminal conduct. Life in prison is the answer the court gave to the question of what accountability looks like in a case like Hendricks Frink's. It is not enough. It never is. But it is what justice can do. And this channel will always document what justice does, so that the children who cannot speak for themselves are spoken for, so that the communities where these tragedies happen are informed, so that the public record reflects not just the charge but the outcome. If you know a child who appears to be severely underweight, malnourished, or living in conditions that raise serious concern, please contact the Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4-A-CHILD immediately. Hendricks Frink's neighbors said the family seemed friendly and cordial. No one knew. That is why community vigilance matters. That is why this conversation matters. That is why this channel matters. Thank you for watching Cold Case Hour. If this episode moved you, if it made you think, if it made you hold your own family a little closer tonight, please like this video and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear these stories. Leave a comment below and tell us which case you believe deserves more public attention. These victims were real. Their suffering was real. Their absence is permanent. The least we can do is make sure they are not forgotten. This has been Cold Case Hour. We document the cases that communities cannot afford to look away from. We will be here for the next one. Stay with us.